Welcome to the EMEA Recruitment podcast, produced in partnership with international medical charity Operation Smile. Operation Smile provides vital surgery to children born with cleft lip and palate. If you're able to support this cause, please donate at emearecruitment.com/operation-smile. In this episode, we're joined by Katja Kovalgina, Client Service Director at IQ-EQ. She discusses how presenting yourself positively at work can create an open environment that generates successful relationships.
So, hello everybody. Welcome to the next episode of the EMEA Recruitment podcast in partnership with our good friends over at Operation Smile. As my colleague Rose has mentioned, we're delighted to welcome Katerina onto the podcast today. So, welcome to the show, Katerina. How are you today?
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here, actually, and it is so far a great day. So I think we can make this a very positive and productive talk, I hope. Long though, but it's fine.
That's good. That's good news. Hopefully that trend continues through the day after the podcast as well. So that's good.
I actually really hope for that because it has been dark for quite a while. So I hope it will be a bit better.
Well, I mean, just for the audience to be aware, we're recording this podcast at the beginning of August, and so the good weather is upon us. We're in the middle of a bit of a heat wave, obviously in Europe, and the thought of COVID is almost behind us. I mean, it still lingers around, obviously, in certain conversations, and I think it's quite difficult to have a conversation like this without ignoring what we've been through in the last 3 years. And maybe before we get into the line of questions, I just thought I'd ask you really, I mean, is there any positives that you personally can take from the experience that we've all gone through over COVID? I mean, is there anything that you look back on and think, well, this has affected me now in a positive way to move forward with the rest of your life, really?
Well, that is a very good question, and I didn't really think about that, but I think that overall, all of it was quite positive. And I don't want to sound delusional because I'm quite aware it was a horrible situation, right? People in lockdown, people getting sick. I'm quite aware of all of that. But it kind of gave, I think, aside of people who are really down and beaten up by this whole situation, certain amount of people were able to kind of transcend the difficulties and maybe do some introspection and work on themselves a bit where there was room for that. And for me personally, I did a lot of that because you were stuck inside your house. So there is nothing else that you can actually do. So I did a lot of work with myself, on myself, and ultimately, I learned a lot about what this person is and where to go next. And ultimately, on another note, we are going to the office less, so we have more free time. Well, it's not free time, but it's more flexibility, and I really like that trend. I think it gives people more of a feeling that it's not 9 to 6 and you have to work and then basically you only have your evenings, but you do have a bit of a life. Especially for the office people, I think that is a very drastic but also very important change. Because yes, you can work longer in the afternoon or at night, whatever you prefer, but you kind of have this, okay, I'm going to go for a walk now for 30 minutes, or I don't know, something to keep you, alive and more free. So I think that has been a good change. And what else is there? Yeah, so I think for me, that flexibility was quite positive, and also the fact that you had time to do some self-searching, which can be helpful.
No, it's true. I mean, I think that it's something that a lot of people have taken over these 3 years. I mean, it was hard to find, lots of positives, I guess, when we're in the middle of it all. But I think in retrospect, there's been a lot of people who've done a lot of self-reflection and have learned new things or refocused or reprioritized where they want to go their lives and careers. And I mean, on the subject of things that people do outside of work, I mean, I know obviously you're quite an accomplished pianist, so I guess were you able to continue this work you're doing on the piano, and I guess that helped with your kind of mental stability, being able to open up the piano and really focus on that rather than what was going on in the outside world a little bit.
It's funny that you mentioned piano, because I haven't actually played for like 12 years now.
Oh wow! Okay.
or maybe even more. I don't remember, but yeah, you're quite accurate and on point in terms of, yes, I was very serious about it. I went to the conservatory when I was like a kid studying, but I haven't done it since, because to be honest, I didn't really like it. So it was never like a mental, it got on my nerves, let's be honest. But I do, and I have always done a lot of things with music and workouts and anything that is more creative, also some writing. So I have done a lot of creative stuff aside of my not so creative job. Although yes, well, to be honest, we do need creativity there as well, but different. So yes, I have done quite a lot, also specifically in this Corona period, to keep myself sane, which is, I think, very helpful, because you cannot, I think it's impossible to maintain the status quo of your life if like the whole world is changing around you. So you kind of have to go with it, or, well, it will not be that great. So not piano, but a lot of other things. Yes.
No, it's interesting, because obviously, within that, you obviously trying to focus on things that you enjoy, that make you smile. And one of the first questions I wanted to ask you was given that the show is in partnership with Operation Smile, I thought I'd just ask you really what the last thing was that made you smile there, Katarina.
Well, basically I'm smiling throughout this whole thing so far. So I think you have seen... news. Yeah, well, it wasn't, I didn't plan it, but it just is happening. So I guess those were the last smiles also. I do smile quite a lot. So it's not like I need to have some big event or a tremendous joke or anything. Like 15 minutes ago, before we started, I received a Teams message from a colleague of mine, and he just made a stupid joke because I made a typo in a message to him on Teams. And I was like laughing out loud in front of my computer. It wasn't like a spectacular joke or anything, but I think that laughter is also another way to stay sane. So yes, I like doing that, and I do it quite a lot.
No, I mean, it's I suppose it's something that's easier said than done. I think a lot of people would love to have that kind of approach to life and approach to situations. I mean, is it just naturally something that is you? I mean, does this come from your parents, this kind of very smiley approach and kind of attitude to life, or is it something that you had to work on at any point?
I think, well, a part of it is maybe something that you're born with, but for a great part, this is more something that I've developed throughout the years, and without going into too much detail of the things that I have had in my life, I think it's a matter of when because I went really low at some point in terms of like sadness and difficult things and personal stuff. But then at some point, maybe also partially because of Corona, that's why I'm so positive about this whole situation, because of the things that I've done to kind of heal myself and teach myself and wanted to move forward with life, it suddenly just went up. And I did learn to treat life less seriously than most people tend to, and not in the way that I'm just oblivious to everything that's happening around me and I'm just not paying any attention, but in a way that if you kind of take a certain distance from whatever is happening in your life or around you, you can smile more often, because I mean, it's also a matter of laughing about yourself once in a while. I mean, it's ultimately not that serious if you're late for a meeting 2 minutes, or if you cannot get the tomatoes you wanted to at the grocery store. Yeah, you can cry about it, but you can also just laugh that, oh my God, my life is not always easy, or, you know. So yeah, that is something that I've just developed for the past maybe 3 years or so, and it has changed my life drastically, especially mentally.
Yeah, I mean, I'd imagine this really helps with your role as well, because obviously you have a very client-facing role, and so part of this is building long-standing relationships with clients. And I mean, I think there's a lot of studies been done on successful relationship building, and at least 55% of that is body language and the sense that you're giving. So I mean, do you think that has been a key part of creating long-term relationships with clients for you?
Yes, I think definitely with clients, and also with my direct subordinates, so the team. So this change in, well, what I am and how I present myself has made a huge difference in terms of interactions with people. So in the beginning, just for you to know, when I started my career, people called me Ice Queen. So I was like I also tried to be, I had to be, but I was very formal, very cold. I never actually smiled, because to me it was like, okay, I have to be professional, and you have to put a certain face on, especially I was 21 when I started. So as a very young woman in this business world, I felt that I needed to put this kind of mask on and be very professional. Otherwise I would be just like happy blonde kid. But that worked for a while. Maybe also at that age it is something that I needed to do, but right now it doesn't work that way anymore, because when you don't open up to people, even in the beginning of a conversation, there is immediately a wall, and then after this wall is set up by the other person as well, it's very difficult to come through. So if you want to talk about fees or difficult topics, complaints, anything really with clients or with your direct subordinates, you kind of need to first set up an atmosphere that people can actually talk to each other, because otherwise it's just, and that doesn't work, because you cannot come to a solution. But when you set up an atmosphere where people are actually wanting to open up to you, then the answer as to what bothers them, for example, if it is a difficult conversation, it kind of comes immediately, because they just want to say it. And that has changed my relationship with clients and also my team. So instead of pushing them and having every conversation in this reactive argument style, it's much easier to have this kind of open atmosphere where people know that they can come to you and they can just say what it is. And making a joke, I mean, it's cliche, but it does work to kind of open people up, right? So kind of don't remember the question anymore, but let's move on.
No, it was really, I mean, I think you answered the question, because it was around, how you're having this, happy exterior will help build relationships with clients, really, and if that has been a key part of it, which it obviously, obviously has, and I think, do you think there's any other key attributes that is important in that, though? I mean, obviously you've got the elements of being true to who you are, to being open and honest with people, to build the relationships. I mean, are there any other factors that you feel come into play when you look back at the relationships you've had with clients that have been really important to the success?
Yeah, I think key is to actually be there and listen, because we often, especially when we plan a meeting, and especially if it's a client, we prepare an agenda, right? So you go in there with, I need to get this is my goal, and that is perfectly fine, because you do need to know why you're entering into a meeting. But what we often forget, because we are so focused on doing this well, we forget to actually be there and listen to what the other person has to say. The problem with that is, if we don't listen, we will never come up with a solution that suits everyone, because you just don't understand or know what the other one wants. So I think it's really key to, aside of every agenda and planning a meeting, whatever you need to do, it's really key to, at some point during the meeting, let it go and just hear what the other has to say. Because in that moment, when you're there, a creative solution will come. If you truly know what the message is that the other is trying to convey. And then it will be easier to, well, agree on something.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it's really true. I mean, I think that, you know, these days with the options of communicating with people are wider than what we've ever had, you know, with social media and all the different medias where you can reach out to people, whether it's email, WhatsApp, text, or whatever you choose to use. And I think the more that people are distanced from the interpersonal meetings, the harder it is to highlight to people how important the listening side of it is. It's actually I regard it as a skill that you've got to learn, the listening side, and it, as you say, it's vital to, you know, clients' relationships, and it's probably no coincidence that listen is an anagram of silence. And I think you need to have elements where you're happy to have 3 or 4 seconds of silence in between discussions, so that people can think about what they want to say next, and it's a considered discussion, really.
Yeah. I don't really know though whether it's like really a skill that you have to train. I guess yes, but I think a very important thing is to be aware of that you have to do it. And also because often you don't think about it. Like I said, you go in there, you have to do this, right? Because your manager told you you have to get this agreement signed. But if you're aware that you actually have to also just be there and listen, then you will. But for that, it's not so much a skill, like there is no step plan other than maybe during the meeting for a second or 2 or minutes, try to let go of your goal. Like it sounds counterintuitive, but like for a few minutes, if you let go of that goal of, I need to get this from this person, so I have to keep talking until they just cave. So, and if you just hear what they have to say, and then from there you can flow, and maybe the conversation will go into a different direction than you intended to. But does it really matter if you both are then aligned and if everything works well? Because you started with the relationship aspect, right? The outcome of any talk can be different than what your goal was. But if it's still in line with your desires and the expectations of the other person, then you're all set. So I think it just starts with being aware that you have to do it and letting go of the whole thought process for just a bit to see what the other has to say. It's very philosophical.
No, but I was going to say this probably links in very well with what you mentioned a bit earlier on, you know, where you just made that decision to be your true self and to have more fun, you know, in your communication. Then when you are in meetings, you're not having to think about, oh, how should I act? At least that's something that is not in your thought process, because you just bring your true self to the table, and then the other things happen more naturally because of it. You're not trying to be somebody that you're not, you know, because that takes effort and it takes brain power to do, you know. So if you're not thinking about that, then that helps the conversation flow and helps with the listening side of things. And I think clearly this has had a big impact on your career, you know, very successful in your career. And I thought it'd be interesting to just ask you how it feels now to be in your position in the director role. You know, what does it feel like to be in this role right now?
There are different feelings. I mean, there's not one feeling that I have when I identify myself with this position that I have. I think the overall, like in general, it feels a bit like being a savior. Because every day, like, okay, I have 24 people who report to me within the team. And aside of that, there are also clients, right? And aside of that, there is also other people, stakeholders who are also wanting something. So my day is probably that's already another question, but the day is basically led by other people. And the central, like the focal point of everyone is like, in this particular case would be me trying to solve everyone's problem. That's why I said savior, because there's always some problem, and often also emotional problem, rather than only practical, which for some reason cannot be solved by the person or persons in question, and then they come to me and then I have to help out. Sometimes it's more psychological work, sometimes it's actually practically finding a solution to a client's problem or an employee problem, anything really. But when I'm in a good mood, I actually enjoyed that savior thingy going on. So yeah, I think the overall feeling is like, oh my God, it's nice to be needed by the people who I'm working with. Mm-hmm. When you're tired, you don't want to be needed, but overall, overall, yes, it's like, okay, it's nice. It's very rewarding to know that people can come to you and you can solve things for them quite easily, while for them it's a struggle. Mm-hmm. So it feels good, that part of the job, on average.
Because I say that's got it with the number of people that you are impacting on a day-to-day basis, or looking after on a day-to-day basis, with all their different needs and wants through the day. It's got to be quite tough to have a focus or to prioritize. You know, so how do you tend to do that? I mean, are you quite strict with yourself on things like time management and focus, or is it a challenge because you're not too sure what each day is going to really bring?
So there are two ways that I've tried to do this. One, time management, I mean, and also kind of structuring through your day. One is that I tried to control the day. So I tried to put in my agenda what needed to be done, when I would have a meeting, which items I would need to finalize, etc., etc. And then preferably I would not do anything that is not planned. So for example, if requests come in and if it's not that urgent, then I would just let it pass and do it the next day. So that is one approach that I've tried. The second approach that I've tried is just go with the flow. Because at some point I noticed that it really doesn't turn out the way it should, for like a lot of reasons. For example, because I mean, I can't stick to my agenda, but if I see that I have like 15 missed Teams messages, I'm not going to ignore them until the next day. So it just doesn't work that way, especially when you're a people manager. You have to be there. So that's when I switched to the second approach. And the second approach is basically just going with the flow, like I said. And that is mainly being led by other people's agenda. So I do have meetings planned. I also know what I need to deliver on what day. But those are more an exception, rather than that I plan my days according to those goals. The majority of the day now is more like answering requests of the team, dealing with ad hoc questions, and other operational stuff that just pops up, like signing documents. I have to be for that in the office or anywhere. So it is a bit more dynamic, and it's maybe also harder to deal with in the beginning, because I had situations literally when I was typing an email with one hand, having a phone call with another hand, and then I also have a kid, and the kid was running around somewhere here because it was Corona time and we didn't go to the office. So literally mind-blowing. But once you get used to the fact that things just pop up and you have to deal with them in that moment, and then the situation is gone, it's kind of easier because you don't have to carry it all the time with you. So it's not like, oh my God, I have 105 missed messages and I will have to deal with them like tomorrow. You just deal with them now, and then you can sleep and you don't think about it anymore. Also, a way to keep yourself sane. So I think in terms of time management, I just go with it now. Most of the time.
No, that's it. I mean, it's one of those things that it's always interesting to hear how people plan and manage their days and try to get focused where they can. And I think you're right. What you mentioned earlier, that you can have a nice plan in the diary and think, okay, these are certain hours and times I'm going to put to this specific area, but it can be very challenging to keep that going over a course of a week, month, or year. You know, you might get a few days where everything fits in nicely, but you've got to be prepared also to step out of that plan and let things go with the flow, as you mentioned. And but I mean, I guess, you know, something you mentioned a few times in the conversation is the people that you work with. And I mean, obviously, you know, if you surround yourself with great people, then it helps a lot in helping with your kind of your day and the work that you have to do. And I suppose we can't really have an interview on a recruitment podcast without asking you a question about people and recruitment. So, I mean,
let's go.
So over the years, I mean, how have you gone about recruitment? I mean, how have you gone around finding, you know, quality people for the roles that you've had open?
So I have been on the side of being recruited and recruiting, but not like myself, but indeed dealing with HR to get people in. And I have also different experiences in terms of how it works and how it should work. So what part would you want to hear?
Well, we could do hear both. I mean, that makes sense. We want to hear the goods, the bad, and the ugly, really. So yeah, it's good to hear both, I think.
Okay, so for me now, especially, it is very important who we hire. So it is a hot topic, actually, because I don't know what is happening in the world or in the market, but it's more difficult, I think, to find someone who will be actually ultimately dedicated to doing the job that they're hired for. So recruitment and getting the right person on the job is extremely hot right now. And it's also very important because it starts with people. You cannot provide a service if people you're working with don't work. So it all starts with your employees and people you have to deal with on a daily basis, because that's our product. I mean, there are also different organizations, right? If you make clothing, then clothes is product. Okay, this doesn't make sense anymore. Anyway, with us, with the service provider, it starts with the people, because we are the ones who deliver. And the trend that I have noticed recently, and I don't know whether it has ever been different, but I think it has, is that people really tend to just switch jobs for the sake of it. But because of that, they, don't really want to stick to the function that they are actually hired for. Like within a year, they already want to move on. Particularly, they want to move on to something more commercial, because everybody thinks that is where the money is because of the bonuses. And also, people do not get enough experience in the job to actually be qualified for the next step. So what we see a lot is people coming in very ambitious, very convincing in terms of, yes, I can do this, I can do that. But ultimately, when starting the job, not being good actually at all. And also immediately, probably also seeing that they're not super good, immediately wanting to move on to something else, something where the money is. People follow the money, which makes sense. I get it. I mean, I like having a salary as well, but it's kind of makes the whole service delivery much harder. So in terms of recruitment, often people who are hiring are mesmerized by the motivational talk that the applicant kind of gives during an interview, instead of focusing on what they actually could bring to the company. I think that is a kind of a problem, because I mean, it's great that you're all charismatic during an interview and stuff like that. And it's also great that the recruiter or HR person explains about the organization. But ultimately, it's not what it's about. You actually have to make sure that the right person is on the right function. And that match is not there often. I'm not saying that every person that applies is bad, but just not for this position. And yet they're somehow matched. So I think the focus should be more exactly on that. Like, this person goes with this job because this works, because the person wants to stay in this job, they like it, and they're also qualified to do it. Not just because you kind of had a pretty speech and yeah. Also, I think that it might be a good idea to have less standard questions, like what are your strengths and weaknesses, but actually go into the person. Because I've done quite, well, you've done a zillion more, but I have done some interviews and the answers are quite always the same. I'm effective, I'm efficient, I'm dynamic, I'm too, what was my favorite one is, and I think I've used that one in the past as well. I am too perfectionist. I mean, basically, you're just saying that you're great, right?
Yeah, it's the Google answer to that question, isn't it?
And then it's actually your weakness, right? So you're saying to your employees, my weakness is that I'm such a perfectionist.
It's but I think you're right. You know, I mean, what we see and what a lot of clients kind of work on is having as much definition as you can at the start of the process in terms of the role and the personality that you want to bring in, and trying to get the cultural fit right is the big thing. You know, I mean, I think if you get the cultural fit correct, then actually it helps a lot with the person buying into the business, you buying into the person, but also it helps a lot for retention as well, which, as you've mentioned, is a big challenge for a lot of companies right now as well. You know, it's not just hiring people, it's actually keeping them happy, you know, which is a big challenge. I mean, I think you know, but it was a question I was going to ask you actually, because I mean, clearly, you know, you've had a number of successful years at IQ-EQ and you know, had some promotions over this time, you know, so it's one of those things, I guess. You see less and less often people staying at companies for more than 5 years. So, which, you know, maybe 15 years ago, it was seen as a downside. You know, people had moved jobs every 2 years. It was actually quite hard for these individuals to get interviews at the majority of companies, whereas now it's seen almost as the usual thing to do. But for yourself, you know, you've obviously been there for a good period of time now, you know, so what is it that you enjoy working at IQ-EQ? Is there something specifically about the business that you really enjoy?
It's a good question. I don't think it's about the business. I mean, it's not about the product. So, I mean, it's good. It's an interesting industry. There's always something new, and it's very growing. It's like changing every single, that's not say day, but every year it changes a bit. So it is interesting, but I don't think that's the reason for me. I think in the beginning, the reason was so contrary to a lot of organizations, they saw me. And this is a very important personal aspect, I think. They saw me as a person and they gave me a chance to improve and grow. So in the beginning, that was the reason why I stayed, because often people leave because they want to move on and they want to change and whatever. I think it's lack of growth, especially with younger people. But I was fortunate enough to be seen by my employer, by the people there, and that made me stay because it's just interesting to evolve. And I don't care whether I evolve within one organization or 10. It's not really about that. So for me, that was quite important. And now it's a bit different because it's not so much about growing anymore, but now I feel like I can, so I've done this growing part, but now I can contribute. And that is a different way of staying satisfied. When you're a bit younger, then you kind of want to achieve things. But when you have gained a certain amount of experience and you know how to do things, then you want to contribute. And that is what I can do now. And that keeps me so far, aside of the salaries, of course. I mean, we're all people. But aside of that, it's that I can be this savior that I called myself earlier on, and that I can contribute and help people as a manager, help people basically do the job that I did 3 years ago or 4 years ago. That is, like, in my eyes, the natural flow of life. You learn and then you teach. You learn, you teach, right? So yeah, I guess that's why. It's a good organization, in case you're watching.
No, but I think you're right. I mean, in terms of a time scale in a role or a business, you have to have that growing period. You've got the first year where you're just really settling into the role and the company. The second year where you start to get your kind of feet under the table, and then it's the third year onwards where you get to that point where you mentioned you can contribute, and regardless of what level you're at and what discipline you're in, it does normally take about 3 years to get to that level where you can be in that type of position. And I think it's a consistent theme that people talk about on the podcast, actually. And given that everybody we've had on the podcast have got long and distinguished careers, it's a message we try to get out, especially to the younger generation who are quite used to this changing jobs very quickly. Is saying, really, yeah, you can get a short-term gain from changing jobs swiftly, but it's more, it's going to take you longer to achieve what you want to achieve. And even when you get to that point, whether you want to be a sales director, a CFO, or a CHRO, you're not going to be as accomplished because you've moved around so much to achieve what you want, rather than actually, sticking and learning somewhere and gaining credibility. So I think it is very good. Yeah, very good point that you brought up there, that I think we want to make sure we highlight to the network as well today as well, I think.
Yes.
And then in terms of, because within that answer as well, you mentioned about, well, we're talking about changing roles, changing sort of atmosphere, and the change in our lives that we've had over recent years. But I think something that is changing, that is we're in the middle of, really, I guess, at the moment, is the area of how much BI and data and AI is affecting our lives, both at work and at home. And I guess the question I like to ask is around this, because I think, obviously the influence of BI and data is clear in our lives currently, but it's only going to increase. And I just wondered, from your point of view, how do you see your kind of discipline in the future as it becomes more and more led by data, more and more led by business intelligence and artificial intelligence? Do you see that your role and the roles of future people coming into the discipline, do you think it's going to change quite dramatically because of it?
Yeah, so over the past, I think, 7 years, the whole way we're talking about work, right? So I will just go into that, not the robots walking over the earth. Over the past 7 years, I think the whole way of doing our job has changed completely. So when I started, there were basically no systems or data, or, well, I mean, there was some time tracking thing, and there were some documents to be uploaded on the normal, like, computer PC drive. So all of that was very basic, easier to work with, because you didn't have to, at least, well, you could be more, you could just do things, right? You could print, you could sign, you can whatever. What has changed now, and I see a lot of people struggling with this, is that we have like a zillion systems now in place, which collects data on every possible different topic, and they try to integrate everything in one system so that people don't completely go mad. but at the same time, it doesn't work. So instead of that, you try one system, second, third, fourth, fifth, implement this, implement that for planning, for commercial purposes, for training purposes. There is another system. HR payroll is a different system. So all the data is collected somewhere in all of these different places. And the response that I often get from people that are in the team or within the organization is like, oh my God, I also have to serve clients. I cannot deal with this. Because, and I do understand that, especially like, look, okay, my grandparents, they didn't know phones, right? So it was difficult for them to get to know that. So now we are somewhere in that chain. And for some people, it might be very easy to get familiarized with all of these new processes. But there's also still another generation. They just got phones. Well, I'm exaggerating, but I think you get what I mean. And now instead of like printer and scanner, there are like 10 different systems to collect data, and they don't know what to do with it. So it takes a lot of time, and for now, and I'm not saying it's not going to get better in the future, for now it's just costs money. And because people, instead of working on their clients and delivering, they look at the screen, eyes bleeding, and try to like get acquainted with whatever needs to be filled in the form. And then there is a next form, and then there is another one. So for now, it just affects our chargeability, our deliverables, and our invoicing. Probably at some point, I mean, I have all the faith towards people who are trying to implement this. Probably at some point it will be more efficient. I don't know. But it's not gonna be this year or next year or the year after. It might take some time. So at this point, I cannot fully grasp how it can help, rather than making everything visible so that we are completely fully monitored from every possible angle. That is what I can see. I cannot see how it can help the people yet, but maybe it will. I don't know. Let's keep smiling.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good way of summarizing it, really. That's taking us back to where we were at the start of the conversation. If you keep smiling, then things will work out. So that's good. And maybe the last question I have for you to hopefully continue the smile as well. I mean, obviously, we've talked a lot about what you've achieved in your career, the things that have been important to you, the people you work with, and so on. And so we talked all about where you've been, but I also thought it'd be good to talk about where you might be going. So most people have, whether they call it a bucket list or they have things on their lists of places that they really like to go on a holiday or an activity they really like to do at some point in the next 5 years. So I thought to end the podcast on a light-hearted way, it'd be quite nice to find out if there's anything on your, let's say, bucket list that you really like to do, and what might be up next, really.
Yeah, I don't really have a bucket list, because all of the things that could be on there, I'm doing randomly, like skydiving, did that. I don't know, like hiking at 4 a.m. somewhere on an island, done that. And no, I mean, I just try to do things in my life overall, right? So there's not a list. But I mean, I would like to do some camera work, something outside of the job. So something more creative and something that relates to speaking, facing people, and maybe even doing things like these to spread the word out, to smile more.
Yeah, well, I like that message. Yeah, that's one thing that I think, as you say, if you keep smiling, then a lot of things, good things seem to happen. I think that's true. But you've done the skydiving. Where did you do that?
In the Netherlands, actually, on an island. It was a lot of fun, and it kind of puts your whole life into perspective, because I mean, the first time that I did it, it was a life-changing moment, because you literally see the earth from above, and it's mind-blowing. And when the free fall happens, you cannot breathe, and you're just flying, you're falling to the ground, and it's like, it's mind-blowing, really, if you're not afraid of heights. So it is really recommendable if you want to take life less seriously, and if you want to because for a couple of hours after the first jump, I was a different person. I was not worried about anything, because basically you almost have a death experience.
Yeah.
I mean, it feels in a way that way. So when you're on the ground and you're done and the adrenaline is pumping, you basically feel alive and happy, and it really doesn't matter what your, I don't know, dog ate, or what problems you had yesterday. All of that kind of disappears for a bit, comes back, but at least for a bit you are on point. Yeah,
because I can imagine there is that bit as you're just about to jump off the plane, and it's did you ever feel I can't do this as you were stepping towards jumping out into the sky? Was there ever a point of you that thought, I'm not sure I can do this, and take a step back, or were you just right, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm getting off?
I knew I would go through with it, even the first time. So there was never a moment that I seriously considered not doing it. Mm-hmm. But I mean, on the inside, there were moments, especially the most difficult part was waiting for the jump. So actually before you get into the airplane, because they make you wait, and it can happen basically within you have 4 hours, and then during those 4 hours you either do it or not. So you never know when it's your turn to die. And when you have to wait and you're looking at all of those people landing, you're okay, how can I breathe? But then for me, when I got into the airplane with all the equipment and stuff, and the person who is you're jumping tandem, right? So there's someone with you. When I got there, it was, I didn't have a choice anymore, because you're in this metallic thing that just takes off the ground, and the doors are open, and there are other people next to you. You cannot get out. You can by jumping. And then there is this moment where you're sitting before you get out of the plane, where you're just sitting on the edge of the airplane, and your legs are already off the the edge of the plane. And you see this whole world below you. That is really scary. And then he pushes you over, and then you don't know what's happening. It's then it's a minute of pure adrenaline, because you're just falling onto the ground, and then when the parachute opens, you're okay, I'm alive. Because nothing can happen anymore. So
it's but I guess you were smiling all the way through it. That's
I was gasping for air most of the time. I was doing this, and also I had horrible pain in my ears. But after that, I was smiling like crazy. It was all sparkles and rainbows and whatever.
Well, that's great. It feels like we've got the full circle on the podcast. We started talking about smiling, and then we've ended with it as well. So it feels like a great way to close off. And firstly, it's a huge thanks for taking the time to be with us on the show today. I mean, I've taken a lot from it. I know the network will as well. So it's great to spend this time with you. And obviously, if the network wants to reach out to you, what's the easiest way for them to do that?
Yeah, LinkedIn would be the way to go. Yes, because
that's so good. What we'll do, we'll make sure we put your link on the podcast promotion as well when we send it around, so it's easy for people to connect with you to your page on LinkedIn as well. So
perfect.
Yeah, that's great. But again, a huge thanks, Katja. Great to speak to you today, and I hope you enjoy the weekend that's around the corner. And we'll definitely keep in touch.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.